Hello, I'm Earl Wyenberg, and this is Book Circle Presents The Cavalry Cycle. The stories I've read in the cycle until now pertain to the class of 17, but there was a class before that. This is the class of 16. Roland Vimont. Captain Fletcher sighed. Nice to get fair warning. Listen to this. Dear Captain Fletcher, I write to inform you of the impending arrival of my son Roland and to apologize. Roland is my eldest son, but I have come to the conclusion that he would make a disastrous husband and father, not to mention Baron. I have therefore urged him into your service. He is looking forward to a career of magic and adventure in the out zones. He does understand that the transformation is permanent. Thank heaven for that, Sanders remarked, if true. Yes, very depressing trying to console an idiot wailing about his new shape. Insulting, too, if you think about it too long. Right, what's wrong with this shape, I'd like to know? Lots of artists have rendered it. Like Linda, what's her name? Northwick, she sent me a print. She edited down your handlebar mustache. Sanders shrugged. It is unfair to inflict my son on the dedicated cavalry. You and your brothers in arms have done great work in our age of exploration. I acknowledge, too, the hard work and self-sacrifice of your cavalry. You do not need a recruit like Roland, but I need to remove him from the succession. I write relying on your discretion, of which I have heard from Lady Modeste Ilbert, Lord Albert Hardwin, and Sir Aubert Geary. Lady Ilbert owes her succession to talking her older brother into joining, doesn't she? Sanders asked. Yes, he's hardly more than a beast of burden, but he's a deal happier as he is than being a figurehead. Pleasant enough oaf. And Geary? His son showed up steaming mad and snarled at me as I shot him, then sulked through most of training until he acquired a new interest, running smuggled goods through the expeditions, or so the rumor goes. I suppose he was blackmailed into joining by his family, vanished 3 years ago after his expedition arrived in Gavura Set. Not that anyone's gone looking for him. In recognition of the value of your service, the value of our disposal service, it's more civilized than assassination. But why pick us? Why not shove him into a monastery? Grumbled Sanders. Because you can announce you were mistaken about your calling and walk out of a monastery, unless you're being blackmailed, and you can still sire embarrassing grandchildren. Is this one of those? Keep listening. Of your service, I'm setting up an annuity to reduce prices at the base shop. That's about the 8th one. Is it a bribe when you would have to do the favor anyway? Sanders asked. Call it a sweetener. Whatever, he didn't have to do it, as you note. If he's doing it so we'll be nice to Roland, it's a measurable sign of actual affection, maybe. At present, my son Roland is 19, of no more than average intelligence and impulsive. He is a wastrel with money, not through extravagance, but because he cannot be bothered to keep track of it. He is not a drunkard, but if you keep handing him drinks, he will keep drinking. He's not going to like the rule about wine, Fletcher observed. Sounds quite capable of getting drunk enough on whiskey or beer, said Sanders. His besetting sin, however, is lust. He has a failing common in my class, though I do not myself subscribe to it, of believing that codes of sexual conduct are for other people. I call that a suspiciously specific denial, said Sanders. Maybe Daw learned a lesson that Roland refuses to. There have been, to my knowledge, 5 liaisons threatening scandal on the family, 2 with Grand Norman girls, 3 with foreigners. One of the foreigners was of the Mond Minor, but thanks to my son's insistent attentions, is now sundered. Fortunately, all were too sensible to let him sire a child, but I cannot count on such luck holding. Fletcher paused. Details, he growled. I need details. Does he get physical, or just make a pest of himself, or flash money around to draw in the cupidinous, or what? What are the odds he knows the word cupidinous? It may seem strange, therefore, that I have directed him into your service. I mean no offense, but you know your own reputation problems, even as you know they are undeserved. But in your theater, he can be prevented from the disastrous marriages and affairs that would certainly ensue should he remain human, visiting tragedy on himself, his children, and the young woman who thought herself clever or charitable in marrying him. Charitable, Sanders echoed. Wife as nursemaid. That suggests he might not be malicious. That would be something. Yes, we can hope. Give me a sweet tempered simpleton every time. But nursemaid gives me an idea. We'll get one for Roland. Maybe some of the other pips will be willing to keep an eye on him in return for some privileges. Eowick likes hot bourbon and cream, Sanders remarked. Eowick was the stable brownie. An idea, certainly. You should know also that Roland's younger brother Richard is in some anxiety over his brother's safety in his impending military career. He has enlisted in the standard cavalry, though I do not think keeping an eye on his brother was his principal motive. As I write, he has been in training at the Upham base for 2 months. Unlike his brother, he is sensible, self controlled, and reasonably intelligent. Rather than risk 2 sons in the work of exploration, I would have forbidden this, but he is 17, so I could not. I admit that 14 years from now, all going well, he will likely be a young man very well suited to inherit the barony. Perhaps his elder brother will also have reached some kind of maturity, starting with your tutelage. Please do not hesitate to call on Richard if you need help with Roland. Know anything about Richard Vimont? Fletcher asked. No, let's pull his record. Sanders addressed himself to his computer. Standard gets school records and such, he muttered. Poor old dedicated just gets told they're crown subjects, competent to volunteer, and not actually in jail at the moment. Beggars can't be choosers, and we get those royal preferments. They leave it to Blackholt, Sanders groused on, to verify they're actually male and, initially human. Here we are. Reasonably intelligent, amounts to an okay-ish performance at a Montminor boarding school. Sensible, leaves room for a couple of traffic violations in London, suitably charged to his cover ID and paid for. Doing okay in his current training, no disciplinary actions. Lackluster, I'd say. Enough to make Daw prefer him to Roland. I wonder why he was keen enough on Standard to buck his father's wishes. Ask him, when you interview him for the post of his brother's keeper. There's your nursemaid. Means dabbling in Standard's affairs. They'll call it interference, but perhaps. Ask Laurel Fairforth on the liaison team. She's pretty accommodating. To you. Fletcher grinned. One makes oneself agreeable, and she likes a good gallop. Nice way to get one's exercise. I'm careful to wheeze at the end, so she gives me a hug, comforting the poor old plug. And you, old enough to be her father, grandfather, makes her feel safe. If she only knew. Tut. At his own expense, funded by an annuity from his mother's side of the family, over which I have no control, Roland is boarding his mare Zelda at a local stable. Quite what he expects to do with Zelda once he cannot ride her, I do not know. I do not think he has given the issue any thought. Please keep on the watch for any change in his feelings toward her and act on your best judgment. I am aware of and thoroughly endorse your service's policy of mandatory vasectomies to obviate scandal, but I understand they must be repeated yearly, and slip-ups can happen, especially around Roland. Should he present me with a grand foal, please know that I will do what I can to make sure it has a happy, if celibate, life. Fletcher sighed. I don't know, letting him concentrate on Zelda could simplify things. I mean, her father won't come round with an army pistol. Unless he's a retired cavalryman rather than a horse, Sanders mused. Fletcher shuddered. That sort is, 1, not delicate about his daughter's honor, and 2, blessedly rare. Oh, and 3, usually in hiding. I would not have you think my son a complete loss. He is cheerful, friendly, genuinely brave, and faithful to his friends. He is also a good marksman, which ought to be a useful skill in your service, though I am happy to learn that actual military encounters on your expeditions are rare. In fact, he is a keen hunter, and I hope will prove useful in catching game for the pot when you are afield. Damning with faint praise, Sanders remarked. But it does sound like the picture of an outdoorsy twit without malice. Yes, a nursemaid who can tactfully intervene between him and the local girls may be the ticket. Hope he isn't good looking. Look him up, Sanders recommended. Bound to be a picture of him somewhere on the Nornet. No, here, I'll do it. He began tapping at his computer. It seems a pity that he cannot be turned into a horse completely. Martin's spurs, Sanders looked up from the computer. That's blunt enough. Fletcher cocked his head and looked dreamy. I think he wrote the first draft of this letter some time back when he first suspected Roland would eventually have to be plonked down on horseshoes for the good of the family. He edited it often. He used it for venting. That's a bit of venting he forgot to delete. Word processing meets Dr. Freud. What stuff to waste your receptance on? I don't get to choose. Also, I would not have you think me completely devoid of paternal feeling. I will attend on his transformation day, along with my wife, our two daughters, and Richard. I feel that honor demands that I witness what I am sending my son into, and of course I hope that I shall see him happy at the beginning of his new life. Oh, my lord, please do not put yourself out, Fletcher exclaimed. Oh, well, best to size up the situation, I suppose. But he'll apologize all over again. Surely not out loud and in front of everybody. Hoping to meet you then and reiterate my apologies in person. See, I sign myself, respectfully, Matthias, Baron Vimont. Yet another succession adjustment, Sanders concluded. Scrubbing the gentry's gene pool, our specialty. Wasn't Hardwin the one with orientation issues? Yes, queer for men, straight for mares. We earned our pay that year. Here's Roland's picture. Good, said Fletcher, glancing at the screen. Nothing special. A vacuity of expression that ought to warn off any sensible woman. You'd think. Vimont sounds like he wrote this just after receiving the last straw. I wonder what it was. Expect we'll find out. Probably girl number 5, said Fletcher. He's unloading to you very freely. He relies on my discretion. He said so. Does he know you're showing this letter to me? I'm relying on your discretion. My landlady is very discreet, too. I'm sure this would amuse her. Now that her daughter is safely married, yes. More on the class of 16, William Corliss. Excuse me, sir, you must be with the dedicated cavalry, right? Sanders turned with a quizzical smile. When you're 7 feet tall, dressed in a cavalry duty jacket and a cowboy hat, and are a Palomino horse from the waist down, it is generally considered obvious that you are in the DC. Yes, sir, he continued with a smile and saluted. Lieutenant Liam Sanders at your service, and you are? They stood in the high street of Upham, home to the English Training Center of the DC. The day was clear and sunny, early summer. Sanders had been about to trot into the base car park, thence to his office. William Corliss, the man answered. He was tallish, for a man simple, rangy, and dressed in outdoorsy tweeds. And this is, he looked around. A short figure stepped out from behind Corliss. He should not have been able to hide behind Corliss, not normally, but it was clear that normality did not apply here. This is Derechlew. Sanders tipped his hat politely and inclined his head. Return and we return, he said to the Fae. Keep faith, Derelou replied, kicking Corliss soundly on the ankle as he spoke, and so do we. Corliss did not wince, but maintained a bright, brittle smile aimed at Sanders. Derelou stood a little under 5 feet tall and was so solidly built that had he worn a full beard, Sanders would instantly have pegged him as a dwarf. However, he was beardless, and rather than wearing work clothes, tool belt, and heavy boots, he wore jeans, t-shirt, and a denim jacket. So far, so human. But his face had a decided Neanderthal cast, except for his eyes, which were larger than human and almond-shaped, not by virtue of an epicanthic fold, but from the shape of the sockets. And there were the ears. A low Fae of some kind. Sanders tried not to think the word goblin at all loudly. Some of them took pride in the designation, some took umbrage, some took it the way that would give them most advantage. Hospitality, thought Sanders, that was the ticket, but not at the base, perhaps. It could open up complications, and the stable brownie could get touchy about a perceived intrusion. May I offer you gentlemen some refreshment, he said, wheeling back down the street and aiming for the bow and saber. The pub would only be serving breakfast at this hour, but one glance at Derechlew and Mr. Irwin would produce brandy and a sirloin steak if necessary. 5 minutes later, the three were seated outside the Bow and Saber, equipped with beers. Corliss and Derechlu sat on opposite ends of a bench, and Sanders reclined on the ground, sitting before them with his own mug. It was dustier than he liked to get, but he remembered some quote about turning tragedies into comedies by sitting down and hoped it would work. William Corliss, he said. Your name rings a bell, but I've enlisted in the cavalry, Corliss said. Of course, but you're early, Mr. Corliss. Induction and transformation isn't for 2 weeks. I know, but you see, Derechlu and I have a deal, and we're anxious to go through with it as soon as possible. The fixed smile froze tighter, and Corliss glanced sideways at Derechlu, who favored him with a brief glare. Sanders was not anxious to have a single raw recruit stumbling around the base for 2 weeks before classes began, nor would Fletcher be any happier. But there were only 5 recruits this year, so you had to treasure each one, and not annoying Derechlu was probably worth a lot. Suppose you tell me about it, he suggested. Corliss sighed, took a fortifying swig, and said, My family has an arrangement with Derechlu. We can hunt in his forest for as long as he doesn't catch us. Uh, he seemed to need more fortifying. Isn't that the arrangement always and everywhere? Sanders asked, if you want to call it an arrangement. Well, no, the arrangement is that if he catches us, he just transforms us. Just? Instead of killing, Derechlu explained, the way I used to. Oh, well, that's certainly an advance. Sanders took a fortifying swig of his own. Derechlu nodded. Very persuasive woman, St. Alice were. You want Adam's mark, you lay off the killing, so I promised. Sanders could hear the capital letters. Derechlu grinned genially and jerked a thumb at Corliss. His dad only spent a year as a boar, and his uncle only 3 as a stag, showing what an easygoing fellow he was. Of course, his great-grandfather's still an oak tree, but it's not like he notices, and he were a nasty piece of work anyway. Sanders concealed a shudder. You are a shapecaster, then? Derechlu shrugged. Trade favors with one. Sanders relaxed slightly. So the kind and length of transformation is according to the degree of the offense? Course, only fair. She wouldn't have liked it any other way. But then this one, another thumb jab toward Corliss, has to go and poach 3 salmon off me from the Hazelwood pool. Oh, yes, I had something special in mind account of that. Sanders took a deep breath into both rib cages and reminded himself he was a soldier. Mr. Corliss, he asked, what is the attraction? Corliss, who was shuddering but still smiling glassily, opened his mouth to speak, but Derechlu answered for him. Sell him on for big favors to those who want to raise up wizards, big-time wizards, cause no end of trouble. Want big gains, take big risks, sometimes lose. Oh, yes, I had something special in mind. Corliss nodded. But we were able to reach our agreement. And what was this agreement? Corliss looked at Derechlu, but the Fae only grunted and nodded back. I get paid for my hunting, mostly in favors. Some of them are transferable. I gave all the transferable ones to Derechlu, and in return, he allowed me to pick the transformations subject to his approval. Ah, and you picked us. Oh, yes. Sanders wondered if this enthusiasm was altogether flattering, this being preferred to Derechlu's something special. The Fae smiled benignly. Soft I am, letting him keep the whole top half of his shape. On the other hand, it's a good stiffin', no time limit, and it were a pretty pile of favors he swore over. He winked at Sanders and pointed at him. You watch him, soldier. He got a silver tongue, and your arrow won't change that. An hour later, Sanders was in the parade field. With him were Corliss and Derechlu, Captain Fletcher, and Dr. Blackhold. Corliss stood the regulation 3 yards away from the other 4, naked, waiting for the sagitta. Derechlu had insisted on shooting the arrow himself, holding it was required by the arrangement. Fletcher, after some careful thought, handed it over along with the bow. Derechlu stared at the enchanted arrow, ran a finger over it several times, sniffed it, licked it, and finally nodded. He fitted it to the bow, and Blackhold started the camera in his phone. Thunk. Without a cry, Corliss fell over. Derachlu watched with interest as the man flailed, stretched, expanded, grew legs, horsehair, tail, then lay panting from 4 lungs. He was now a dark, lean, dapple bay. Corliss gathered his new legs under himself and stood in his new form. Are we quits? He asked Derachlu. Then he put his hand to his throat. His voice had sounded different. We're quits, the Fae answered. Corliss nodded and looked to Sanders and Fletcher. Welcome, lad, Fletcher said. He and Sanders moved in to shake hands. Mr. Derachlu, said Blackholt, might I ask you for your observations on Mr. Corliss's transformation? I have a scholarly interest. Sure, as long as you don't take too long about it. Derachlu moved off with the doctor, but turned back to Corliss for a moment. Like to see you sneak about my woods in that shape. But good fortune to you, boy. He smiled. Return and we return. Keep faith and so do we, Corliss answered, and gave Derachlu his first salute. 15 minutes later, Corliss had enough practice with his new legs to stagger into Fletcher's office, there to complete the paperwork that would normally have been done before the transformation. Thank you, he said for the dozenth time, for letting me in early. I don't want to think what it would have been like waiting 2 more weeks with him hanging about, gloating and threatening. Fletcher nodded. You're quite welcome. I'm not going to start you on real training until the others get here, but you should keep busy and start picking things up. We'll figure something out. When the others do arrive, you'll find you're one of the older ones. Most are 20, plus or minus a bit. In return for your early entrance, I'm going to ask you to give them the benefit of your experience, both from the 2 weeks head start and from life. He traded glances with Sanders. They reckoned Corliss had quite a sum of experience. Teacher's aide? Yes, sir. Happy to, sir. Good. Now, return and we return. Was that just good manners, or do you intend to return to your old haunts? Oh, I'll return, sir. My family and Derachlu have been entertaining each other for generations. 14 years will be no time at all to Derachlu, and I know him. He'll just loaf through it. But I'll spend them sharpening my skills. I'm willing to bet I can sneak through his forest in this shape. The end.